welcome to the Written Words. Today I'm going to talk about the magical use of spells and chants. Now, spells and chants are a part of magic that's rarely discussed, or at least I've not seen many discussions on them. So some people consider working in silence is a good way to create magic. It's something to do with not dispersing the power too much. Personally, I'm the kind of person, I like spells and charms and chants, and so that's what I'm going to talk about today. So there are many ways to create magic, from the symbolic and sympathetic use of items, to the earthy power of herbs, to the abstract use of sigils. But perhaps one that is most iconic to the witch is the use of a charm or a spell. And we can all see the witch mumbling her incantations over her cauldron. And so I think this is part of something that needs to be explored a little bit further when it comes to making magic. So perhaps it's a good idea to explore some of the magical uses of sound in magic. So going deeply into many forms, not just spells and charms, but also music, tones, and meaningless chanting, making sounds. So in many cultures, from the very beginning of creation, sound was said to bring about manifestation. So in the Christian Bible it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. I think I'm paraphrasing this right, I've not read a Bible many years. The Word was with God, and God said, let there be light. Now this whole idea of the first words being light, to me that kind of symbolises that bringing things into awareness, bringing things into manifestation, bringing the darkness into reality. And so that's the Christian slant on the beginning of creation. However, it's also true that many other cultures and religions have similar ideas. So in Vedic texts, the sound of creation is, of course, and this tone contains all the sounds of the universe. The Sufis say that the word of creation is Hu. So if creates the universe, then Amen seals it. In Tibetan mythology, the tones of power were F, let me check, F sharp, A and G, and these were magical sounds that created altered states of consciousness. The words Amen are considered sacred, and the Amen may actually come from the Egyptian god name Amun or Amun-Ra, which means the sun. So there is some idea that chanting words, sounds and tones has some magical effect on an individual, on a person, and on the act of creation itself. We know that magic was a large part of ancient cultures because they have left us written texts, And on some of these texts we have found magical spells, particularly spells to do with cursing and protection. So by this we get some indication of what magic was considered a good use for. And quite often it was to turn away baneful or evil intent, or to turn away sort of evil people who had malicious intent towards us. So some of the earliest magical incantations we have were written by the Sumerians on clay tablets in cuneiform. There are a couple of these examples. One of these are called the Makai. I'm not sure I'm saying that right. And this was a particular curse to turn away evil, baneful magic that was written on a clay tablet and was to be burned. So it's called the Burning Series, and it gives instructions on how to burn away evil eye along with the effigy of a witch. So these clay tablets contain instructions on how to make this effigy, and this effigy is not named. Nobody is named in this spell, with the idea that only the gods know who the perpetrator is. And then the effigy is burned. There are 8 stages of this spell, and part of it is to burn this effigy in the fire with an incantation. And the incantation is: "Pure oven, great daughter of Anu, inside whom the fire of the grave is flaring, inside whom the valiant fire god has taken up residence, whose flames have reached the sky. Burn and set alight, incinerate my witch. May my warlock's and witch's life swiftly, quickly come to an end." It's interesting that it's called the Great Oven, and to me that immediately brings to mind many Germanic fairy tales of burning the witch in her own oven. And so this would seem to indicate this is a very ancient practice and a very ancient notion of consuming evil in the fire, in God's fire, in the divine fire. And so, yeah, that is quite interesting, and some of the oldest magic that we have a record of. So there are other examples of formulas and magical texts that date back millennia, really. Of course, there's the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and we also have recording of the Orphic Mysteries. The Orphic Mysteries were said to save the soul from endless repetitions of reincarnation, and this was done by verses that were learned. Now, the Orphic Mysteries are quite interesting. They were linked incredibly with Pythagorean wisdom, and as you know, this combined mathematical mysteries and musical mysteries along with magic to help the soul in the afterlife. Now, the Pythagorean wisdom later created our modern musical scale, and it created the octave. The idea of this was the intention to impose order upon the creation itself, especially on the sounds of creation. And so this is where we get our musical scale from. So the mystery and magic of music is that its 8 notes affect the body, affect the consciousness. Specifically, it can affect the chakras and the energy points on the body. Also, there are low rhythmic tones and humming and beats that induce trance in people. And so sounds like Tibetan or Mongolian throat singing are used by shamans to create altered states of consciousness. There are also things like the Sami yoik, which also similarly induces a kind of trance-like union with nature. As far as I understand the Sami yoik, it is a meaningless tune, but which conveys the energy of a certain thing. So one of the yoiks you can create is a yoik to water. And I think the idea is that as you create and are led by this singing, you merge with the very object that you are creating the yoik for, to understand its deep spiritual form. In Vedic texts, the idea is that you can chant sounds and names of gods, and with this repetition of chanting, which is more than just the word, it's the word and the note that you sing, you can create higher states of consciousness. You can entrain your consciousness with the order of the universe. So in short, it is a common part of many magical paths to use words. And this even applies in our modern reality, the idea that words can shape reality. Things like saying we work till the weekend. There was a whole video on this. I've forgotten the name of the woman, but you might have heard of the idea. The other idea is be careful of the words that you say to yourself, because you will be wishing and bringing these things into manifestation. Beware of the words that you say to another. Be very careful of not subconsciously accidentally cursing another with your words, of not shaping reality accidentally with the words you are saying. So we have a deep respect for words, and we have a deep, almost a fear of the power of words to create. Now, a magical practitioner who uses words is also to some extent a theatrical actor, and there is a great correlation between magical plays and, as in the Greek Orphic mysteries and the Greek theatre, of taking on the role of a god or of a particular non-human sort of aspect, by using masks and by using a theatrical reenactment. So obviously a great way to remember these kind of epic plays or epic poems was through the use of rhyme and metre. And so it was also used as an aid for memory, but it was used as a very high art to tell very mythic stories. And many of these stories have warning outcomes and great cosmic storylines that kind of affect the whole and not just the individual. Of course, Freud was greatly into this, and so we understand this today as a psychological play. But psychology and magic has a thin line. So to create any kind of musical or magical or poetic endeavour, there are three elements that need to be considered. One is the rhythm of something. The other is melody, and this applies particularly when you're talking about singing and using your voice not just on a monotone, but actually creating a different effect through different notes and tones. So there's melody and then there's harmony. Everything we say has a rhythm, and rhythm affects the physical body. It is what works on the here and now. Melody is when there is a relationship between certain notes and a tune appears. And this kind of affects our emotional state. So if you were considering working on some kind of emotional issue, you could consider the melody of a spell that you are creating. Harmony affects the spiritual state. And harmony is the union of several different voices at once. It is the coming together of several voices, several sounds, and it can create resonance in a person. It can affect, you on a very psycho-spiritual level. However, if the harmony is off, it can have the opposite effect. It can be very painful almost to us. So these are three elements that you may want to consider, especially in music, but also in anything that is a written or sung kind of spell. Now, moving on from that, the power of words. The power of words has been demonstrated in our modern era, most recently by Dr. Matsuru Emoto. And he spoke over water crystals and then examined these water crystals under a microscope. And when they were given blessings or harmonious phrases or sent kind and soft words to them, the crystal itself created a very beautiful and harmonious fractal kind of mandala. If horrible words were spoken at them, if mean words were spoken at them, if cruel words were spoken at them, if they were told they were terrible, if they were told they were useless, if they were told that they were a waste of space, that they were ugly, that they were bad, these water crystals created really distorted crystal structures under a microscope. And this is the most basic visual evidence I think we have ever been given about how words can actually shape the physical substance of a person, of water, of course we are 80% water, and of reality. So there is a demonstrable example of how words will affect the creation of people. Also, you may have seen the sand experiment, where you can put some sand on a metal plate, wire it up to speakers and then play certain tones, and these sands will form into what the Vedic school of knowledge has been portraying as sort of mandalas for centuries. So sound, it would seem, also has a structure. It also has a symmetrical kind of mandala-like structure. And so this is very fascinating too. It would seem that sound and sight and all the senses are perhaps linked, but sound is a very accessible way of contacting all the other senses. Of course, sometimes in many mythic stories, there are many heroes and shamans and magicians and warriors who are wordsmiths, who are poets. It is considered an incredibly sacred path to be a poet shaman at that. And so we have the Druids, who went through the order of Bard, Ovate and then Druid, whose very path itself was a story of poetic power and magical poetry. So in many cultures there is great honour and respect for the poets. And in fact the poet was not just a useless artist. He was, in fact, one of the most magical and respected members of society. They were the shamans, and there are many stories of people receiving poetic powers from the gods or from the ancestors. And so we have people like Druids who go through the order of Bard, Ovate to become a Druid. And of course a bard is a magical teller of stories, a recorder of history and genealogies. And a poet, above all else, a bard has to learn the art of poetry first. And so the way to higher wisdom and higher knowledge is through accessing poetry as a basic means of divine power. So Wikipedia says, a druid was a high-class ranking member of ancient Celtic cultures. Druids were religious leaders as well as legal authorities, adjudicators, lawkeepers, medical professionals and political advisors. The Druids left no written records. While they are reported to have been literate, they are believed to have been prevented by doctrine from recording their knowledge in written form. Such beliefs and practices are attested in some detail by their contemporaries from other cultures such as the Romans and the Greeks. So the poet was the living history itself. They were the record keepers, they were the teachers. And so poetry and verse and oral recitation held great power and great respect in Celtic cultures and in many cultures. Of course, in Norse mythology, there was the art of Galdr, whereas Seder was more feminine form of magic. Galdr was a more masculine form of magic, and Galdr was the use of magical incantation. I'm not going to go greatly into detail about these things. Galdr comes from a verb that means gellen, which means to yell. It's where we get our word nightingale from. And so there's some idea of some kind of yelling, or it could even have contained kind of sound like a Sami yoik as well. But the magical formula of Galdr was 6 lines with a 7th line to seal the magic. There was a certain order, and Jackson Crawford's done an amazing video of this, but mainly it relied upon repetition of vowel sounds and alliteration as a poetic formula. Now, when we're going to talk about poetic formula, this number of 7 has a very magical basis. So this idea of 7 lines to a rhyme contains some connotation with mysticism and with a very powerful magic. Now, in this book, which is a really good book, it's quite old now, but I've still got my copy, Sacred Sounds by Ted Andrews, Transformation Through Music and Words, he says of a 7-lined poem, he talks very much about the structure of magical poetry, which I'm going to go into in a minute. So in this book, he talks of a royal rhyme. This is a rhyme or a poem that has a magical rhythm of 7 lines, and it has a rhyme scheme of A, B, B, C, C. So there is a certain rhythm, and with different kind of structures of poetry, you can create magical effects. He says this is a form that has tremendous potential for magical and healing purposes. Many of us know a simple 4-line poem, which can either be a rhyming couplet or an A, B rhyme. But this is quite a simple rhyme. This is obviously a very solid structure. And if you think about the number of lines that you use to create a poem, then you can have a different effect depending on numerology as well. 7 is a mystical number, 4 is a square, a very manifesting number, 3 is a goddess number, a pairing is an opposition and duality number, and so you can bring this into spell writing as well, as sort of simple numerological recognition of using how many lines of poetry. So you can also use magical devices like anagrams, so words that have letters all mixed up can be used magically as well, so you can have multiple meanings. There's all sorts of kind of different aspects to consider when writing spells. In here again, he's written about the magical quatrain, or poems with 4 lines. A quatrain includes a 5th line often. The first 4 lines use the same rhythm and the same pattern, and the 5th line is an activation of the microcosmic force within us, which is the magical pentagram, of course. He says of the sonnet is a powerful tool for magical poetry. It is a form that is beneficial to invoking creative and fertile energies into consciousness. It has 14 lines. The 14 paths on the Kabbalistic tree of life is the path of linking the primal male with the primal female forces of the universe. Whenever this happens, birth occurs. The rhyme scheme for it is often A, B, B, A, B, B, A, and C, D, E, C, D, E. And so, yeah, a sonnet is very often considered quite magical, and the certain different rhythms, like Shakespeare used the iambic pentameter. That is probably more than likely because Shakespeare knew what he was doing. Quite a magical rhythm as well. The Shakespeare or English sonnet has 4 divisions. There are 3 quatrains, each with their own rhyme scheme, and a rhymed couplet which serves as an epigram. It calls for greater skill, but it is a magical, powerful tool for constructing prayers and ritual invocations. The rhyme scheme follows a pattern similar to A, B, C, D, E, F, G, G. And so these are considered prayer poems, and you can mess about with certain rhythms and certain numerical values. You could try using a quatrain with a 5th line. You could try using the magical 7 lines. You could try using 14 lines as in the sonnets. And so this is all something that you could take into account when creating spells. There is so much in this book. I would like to read it all to you. It's really good. I love it. It's Sacred Sounds, Ted Andrews. I will give credit for having stolen quite a lot of this material from me. So, I mean, there's so much to say about it. Another thing to consider is how you rhyme words, whether it's a weak rhyme or a strong rhyme. A weak rhyme is considered more feminine, more melodious, more harmonious. A strong rhyme is considered a masculine rhyme. It is forcing something into being. And so a feminine weak rhyme might be linking and lilting. The ing sound rhymes, but it doesn't fit entirely. A strong rhyme is sink and think, or be and me, something that entirely resonates. So this is something to use magically as well. So this is something to think about as well, whether you want to create a weak rhyme or a feminine rhyme, and a strong rhyme or a masculine rhyme, which also affects the spell that you're creating. So that is just a few things to consider when it comes to making magical spells. I hope you found that useful. If you've got any other comments about magical poetry, magical storytelling, they are all combined, magical music making and magical spell casting, then please do leave them in the comments below. Thank you for listening. If you did like this, please like and share and subscribe, and thank you to my subscribers and to all those who've left comments in the past few months when I've been a bit vacant. So sorry if I've not got back to you. I've tried to get back to many, but I will catch up. Alright, thank you again. I hope to speak to you all again soon. Cheers, bye.